Good afternoon. Welcome to this workshop of the Board of Education of Anne Arundel County. This afternoon, the board will learn more from Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Mark Bedell, and staff about the school system's work on comprehensive redistricting of schools to most efficiently utilize available space in buildings. The workshop will cover the process to be utilized in redistricting. No specific redistricting proposals will be discussed. ACPS will embark on a process later this school year to change school boundaries in the northern part of the county as part of a plan to develop attendance zones for the new Old Mill High School West and West County Elementary School, both of which will open in the 2024-2025 school year. A process to change school boundaries in the remaining portion of the county will begin after the northern process has concluded and those changes are implemented. Tonight's workshop is being broadcast live on AACPS TV, which can be found on Channel 96 on Comcast and Broadstripe and Channel 36 on Verizon. High-definition broadcasts can be seen on Channel 996 on Comcast, Channel 496 on Broadstripe, and Channel 1961 on Verizon. It is also being streamed live on AACPS YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us, and a Happy New Year to everyone. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bedell, and just to alert members, once the presentation is concluded, we will have an opportunity. I'll go in round robin order, and each member can ask 2 questions, and if there are additional questions, we will do that in a second round. So with that, Dr. Bedell.
All right, well, thank you, Madam President, and want to say welcome back to our Board of Directors, faculty, staff, students, and to our community members. Welcome to 2023. We do open up this year with our first workshop with the school board, which will focus on redistricting. And so we are pretty much ready to get into it. I will pass it over to Matt Stansky and his staff for formal introductions, and then we'll get into the presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Bedell, President Tobin, Vice President Silkworth, members of the board. Happy New Year. Happy 2023. For the record, Acting Chief Operating Officer, Matt Stansky, and I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves.
Kyle Roof, Director of Facilities.
Greg Stewart, Senior Manager Planning.
So we want to cover 3 topics here on today's agenda. We want to just give the board an overview of the planning, design, and construction process, talk briefly about the redistricting policy and procedures, which guides our effort, and then ultimately our recommendation for a redistricting plan and timeline. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Roof, who will walk you through the planning and design process.
So this slide right here is for future reference for the acronyms that will be used throughout the presentation. So we have 3 primary. Sure. So we have 3 primary documents that steer our capital planning process. Long-range planning is documented with the MGT study. This report was first published in 2005 and was updated again in 2015. The purpose of the document is to prioritize major capital projects over a 10-year period. The next revision of this document is anticipated in 2025. The 2 other documents are updated on an annual basis. These are the Educational Facilities Master Plan, or EFMP, and the Comprehensive Maintenance Plan, CMP. Both of these documents are presented to the Board of Education for annual approval each year. The EFMP provides guidance on capacity and enrollment, while the CMP outlines the capital renewal program for existing equipment. So up on the screen is our forward and backward looking enrollment patterns for AACPS. We are a growing county and anticipate to add over 8,000 FTEs over the next 10 years. In 2012, we had an enrollment of 77,000, and in 2031, we anticipate an enrollment growth of 92,000 students. This results in a growth of approximately 15,000 students over a 20-year period. The MGT study anticipated this growth, and the vision for a new cluster along I-97 was documented in the study. Following publication of the MGT study, Anne Arundel County hired a consultant to develop the Old Mill Master Plan. This document was reviewed by the Board of Education in September 2016 and kicked off with the capital planning process for the following schools from left to right on the screen. Quarterfield Elementary School, Old Mill Middle School North, Old Mill West High School in blue in the center of the screen, Rippling Woods Elementary School in orange, Old Mill High School Replacement in blue, Cat North in light blue, and then finally Old Mill South Middle School in purple. In addition to these schools, several additions have been completed in the northern portion of the county that provided additional capacity. This slide is a summary of the Old Mill Master Plan. The green icons indicate completed items, while the blue items represent future milestones. As previously mentioned, the starting point was the MGT study and Old Mill Master Plan. Initial capital plan funding was approved in 2019 for design starts on the schools that will be opening in the 23-24 school year. With the current funding plan proposed in the FY24 CIP, we anticipate the build-out of the Old Mill Master Plan to be completed in school year 28-29. Over this time period, we have spent approximately, or will have spent approximately $952 million in capital funds and added 3,600 seats and 840,000 gross square feet of interior space. This is a substantial investment by both our county and state partners, as well as local taxpayers. In addition to the capacity that we built out in the Old Mill Master Plan, there are several schools that have available seats. As previously noted, the EFMP outlines capacity and enrollment projections on an annualized basis. The information presented reflects actual enrollments from September 30th, 2022, and projected September 30th enrollments from the EFMP for 2022, or for 2026 and 2031 up on the screen. Available seats and utilizations are key indicators we review prior to starting any capital project or redistricting effort. As you can see from the screen, we have approximately 16,000 available seats district-wide in 2022 and project to have 10,800 in 2031. In the MGT study, we defined bands of utilization, with schools over 110% being categorized as inadequate and those below 75% as inefficient. District utilizations are expected to fall within those bands by 2031. The note at the bottom of the screen is important. Portable classrooms are not reflected in the numbers shown, and they provide additional capacity. We currently have 157 portables deployed, with 106 of those located at elementary schools. To put this into perspective, an elementary school portable at an elementary school has a state-rated capacity of 23. The 157 portables, if they were deployed at elementary schools, would provide an additional 3,600 seats. The attached graphics show projected utilization rates in 2031 for each school level. Red indicates schools over 100% of the state-rated capacity, while the green shading indicates schools that are below 100. As a reminder, this chart does not account for existing portable classrooms that are deployed and provide additional capacity. As projected in the MGT study, our annual EFMPs, the growth areas of the county are in the northern and western portions, where development activity has continued at a steady pace. Other areas of the county have more restricted development buildouts. This is true in areas closer to the bay or where the current zoning prohibits larger scale developments such as the Broadneck, Annapolis, Chesapeake, South River, and southern feeders. The availability of seats and enrollment assignments do have a direct impact on the capital improvement program. This impact includes updates to the MGT study, where we'll need to have a firm understanding of revised encatchment areas and individual school capacities. It also affects major capital funding requests to the state that are heavily dependent on enrollments not only of the current school under construction, but also the adjacent schools. If an adjacent school has excess capacity, funding levels go down proportionally. Capital renewals of existing systems are scheduled based off the age and condition of a system. Understanding the replacement schedule for an entire building or a section of building, as noted in the MGT study, impacts when and if we will replace a system. An example of this would be an HVAC renovation or replacement project at a building that is scheduled to be replaced in the next 5 years. Rather than moving forward with that project, we would better use our resources to keep the building functional and use the financial resources on another project. Staffing allocations are also impacted by space. Without the space requirements for office or teaching staff, it's difficult to add additional personnel to the school. The blueprint for Maryland schools envisions expansion of the pre-K in our elementary schools, but educational sufficient space is required to do this. Rather than expending additional capital dollars, we could reallocate the available seats through redistricting. Enrollment projections are updated annually and are based on catchment areas. Redistricting will impact those projected enrollment patterns for each of the schools affected. As we monitor the enrollment projections on an annualized basis, we look at individual schools to determine if there is a need for additional capacity. At a certain point in a building's life cycle, additions are not the best option. This is especially true when a project projects a high level in enrollment or when the core of the school no longer allows for future expansion. At this point, we work with our county partners to find future school sites. But this is not an efficient exercise when we don't have a firm understanding of where the encatchment areas will be redrawn.
All right, we're going to talk now about what are the guiding laws, regulations, procedures that outline redistricting. So we have section 4-109 of the education article, which actually gives state of Maryland boards the authority to create geographic boundaries for schools within their school districts. Here in Anne Arundel County Public Schools, we have policy JAA and the regulation that implements policy JAA that then guides the implementation process for redistricting in Anne Arundel County. So why do we redistrict? There's really 5 big ticket items as to why we would redistrict. Obviously, first is enrollment patterns. As Mr. Roof alluded to, we have just over 16,000 available seats at the moment, and by 2031, we're projecting to still have about 10,000 available seats. Programmatic changes. Again, Mr. Roof alluded to the blueprint. We'll have a new increased demand on our facilities and how they're used and where students attend and why they attend, and so that's another reason. Obviously, we're also embarking on this with new school openings. We have 2 new schools coming at West County Elementary and Old Mill West High School. It also impacts future funding, right? The state and county will be less willing to provide capital funding if there are, for new construction, renovation, if there are available seats to be had for the district. And so doing embarking on redistricting and getting our utilization to its most efficient as possible allows us to better make an argument for future capital funding. And then obviously building additions, construction, and alterations. Redistricting does impact those, the ability to get dollars for those, as well as put students in those facilities once they're completed. So a quick overview of where we are to date. In September of 21, we advertised for a redistricting consultant. The Board of Education approved that consultant in November of 2021. In January of 22, we did revise the board policy when it comes to redistricting. We made a presentation to the board in September about our initial proposed timeline for redistricting and filling Old Mill West High School as well as West County Elementary. And now we are here today presenting you with a revised proposal and timeline. So we are embarking on a 2-phase implementation. The first will be the northern half of the county, which we are recommending to be implemented in school year 2024-25. The clusters are on the screen. They're Chesapeake, Glen Burnie, Meade, North County, Northeast, and Old Mill. And this is again to redistrict that part of the county to get utilizations in our existing facilities to their highest possible, and while also drawing lines for the new Old Mill West High School and West County Elementary. After that, we will embark on implementation of that recommendation and ultimately approval by the board. And then we would then propose attacking the southern part of the county and southern redistricting, ultimately with a school year implementation of school year 2026, 2027. See the clusters that would be impacted on the screen here: Annapolis, Arundel, Broadneck, Crofton, Severna Park, South River, and Southern. Couple of reasons why we are going to take on the northern part of the county first. That is where we're seeing the larger enrollment growth. That is where most of the development is happening in the county. And you can see our projections indicate that we're going to be just over 41,000 students in 2022. And by 2031, we'll be just over 47,000 students in the northern part of the county. We still are seeing growth in the southern part, just not as rapid growth as we are seeing in the northern part of the county. And to give you just a different picture of the numbers, Mr. Roof had given you district-wide. This breaks it up into the clusters in the northern part of the county and the southern part of the county. As you can see, there are more available seats coming in 2031 in the northern part. So again, main goal is to really get the two new schools that are coming on board filled. And to do that, we feel best to take on the northern part of the county first before going to the southern part. So what does our timeline for the northern part of the county look like? We will release a web tool in February of 2023 that will have proposals for the community to provide feedback on through the months of March, April, and May. We will then, staff here will make a recommendation to Dr. Bedell in June. It's important to note that recommendation will include updated enrollment projections that will be releasing for the Education Facilities Master Plan in 2023. So the web tool will have current enrollment projections, while when we make our recommendation, we will be using the latest enrollment projections that we have that were submitted to the Maryland Department of Planning. Then the superintendent in July will make his recommendation to the board. The board process is outlined by JAA, and JAARA will then come into effect, and we will, the board will decide what to take to public hearing in August and September and October. And then ultimately, we would like to see a vote in November. Obviously, the policy dictates that vote can be delayed until April. But we would like, for implementation purposes and notifications to the families, have that vote as soon as possible. And so the recommendation here would be a November of 2023 vote. For the southern part of the county, again, we would want to vote and then fully implement the northern recommendations. And so then we would then release a web tool for the southern part of the county in February of 2025. And following the same process that we follow for the northern part of the county, recommendation to the superintendent in June of 2025 using updated 2025 enrollment projections. Superintendent would make a recommendation to the board, and in July of 2025, the policy and regulation process would take over there, ultimately with an adoption in November of 2025. Obviously, again, the board policy allows the board to wait until April of 26, but again, for programmatic and implementation purposes, we would recommend having that vote as soon as possible. And with that concludes our presentation. We'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Stansky, Mr. Roof, Mr. Stewart. Dr. Bedell, do you want to offer any additional comments before board members?
I do, because I know redistricting is a very intensive, sometimes intimidating process that school districts have to go through, and I haven't experienced a single one where there's been harmony. And what I'm hoping could happen here is we do our part on the front end to try to do our best to take this simple approach. We all, and I mean, when I say we all, administration, the school board, we have the responsibility of figuring out this redistricting in collaboration with working with our community. We have to think about the greater good of the county. The greater good of the county must prevail. And we know, regardless of the type of pressure that's coming our way, we all are going to have to give up something in order for us to get this county to where we want it to go. I don't know what all of that looks like yet, but I know it will be an intense process. But my only thing that I would just say to everybody, as you ask your questions, as you think about the timelines, we want feedback and your thoughts. All I ask is think about the greater good of the system, because in the end, if we don't do this and we don't do it as we've articulated or eventually will agree upon, the district loses a ton of credibility. And I think it compromises our ability long-term from a growth standpoint to secure the resources that we need to be able to continue to do our capital projects and to make sure that our kids have the amenities that they need from a political standpoint. That's it.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Bedell. So as I said earlier, I am going to go in roll call order. Each member has 2 questions in the first round, and if you have additional questions, we'll do another round. So today's order begins with Ms. Frank. So Ms. Frank. Okay, no questions, Ms. Frank. Ms. Ellis.
Well, I do. So I was trying to gather my thoughts. So now I'm on. Thank you very much for the presentation. I certainly have been very vocal about redistricting since I became a member. I was thrown right into it. So many of my opinions have been stated on this. So there's no surprises here. Okay, so I guess I just want to make the point so that I can get to a question about it, which is the board put in to policy or triggering events that would lead to a system-wide redistricting. And the purpose of that going into policy is to stabilize the county. The plan that I see presented, I don't see how this county is going to be stable for many years with this 2-phase plan. So I guess I'm going to ask, what are the obstacles to doing this in one fell swoop rather than 2 phases?
Sure. I'll start and you can. Yep. So I think a couple things, Ms. Ellis, that we, discussed internally and our thinking around this. Obstacle number one is we have to get West County Elementary and Old Mill High School West open. Right. Mm-hmm. And so a district-wide redistricting could potentially, because that would be such a large vote the fear was it could possibly delay the opening of those 2 schools. I think other factors included just doing the northern part of the county would be a big lift. We're talking transportation, notifying families. It's weird when you work with numbers that I work with them all the time. Things can look so easy on a spreadsheet that, but when it comes to actual implementation, can be so difficult. And I think the communication with families, getting them to understand why things are happening the way they are, we felt that approach of taking this in phases. So while the policy does contemplate district-wide redistricting, we believe we're doing that. It's just in a different approach. Other things included, we're embarking on a new strategic plan that the team's going to have to work on. We are embarking on implementing a major shift in education policy in Maryland, and that it just doing the redistricting in one fell swoop may have just been too much for the organization to handle, given the other items that we're trying to tackle. I'll say we're still we're still trying to provide basic transportation services right now, getting kids to and from school on time. And I cannot, on top of that, add on a rerouting possibly of the entire district in a year and a half to the plate of those folks right now. And so I think given these confluence of factors, this is why you see the proposal you see before you today.
Okay, that's a reasonable explanation, but I'm going to point out the downsides I see to this plan and ask for a little input on that. So if we do this in 2 phases, we either will create boundaries that can't be touched between north and south, or we'll be moving families twice within a couple of years. That to me is a major upheaval and creating additional contention within the district. Annapolis needs relief now. And I am an Annapolis parent. Everyone knows that. I've had kids, students at that school since 2014. But I have no personal stake in Annapolis because my daughter will graduate before even the 2024 redistricting. So I'm speaking with intimate knowledge, not self-motivation here. Annapolis, we all know that Annapolis has a significant population with some of the greatest need in this county. And we still have not reconciled moving students out of South River since 3 years ago. So I don't see that Annapolis can wait until 2026. While I do see a countywide rather than 2-phase plan, yes, I can see how it creates a lot of work on the front end, but doing it 2 phases is going to create additional work, because if we are going to move families twice, all the rerouting, all of that is a lot of that's going to be done twice. And this plan, I see creating years of contention and upheaval throughout the district rather than getting it all done. I have concerns about Arundel, where the district that I do represent. I see in this plan it's been placed in the southern phase. However, it's obviously going to go through a northern phase because of opening West County Elementary. So I just, for me, and with all the other things going on, as you mentioned, Mr. Stansky, the blueprint and all of those things that are going to really need to be implemented over the next few years, creating stability in our county to me seems like something that is more urgent. Getting this done and then focusing on those priorities. So that all being said, what I'm hearing, the biggest concern that you shared with me was the concern that doing it countywide could create a delay in opening those 2 schools. Absolutely, if we were to do a countywide redistricting, this board would absolutely need to commit to passing a plan that would not delay opening those 2 schools. So Dr. Bedell and Mr. Stansky, if you care to provide any input to what I've just presented as I see concerns with the plan, that would be great.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of issues, and I've shared these issues with you. I don't know that something that you want done has been done in this school district over 40 years. That's number one. I've been here 5 months. I have yet to even visit the entirety of the county. We are forced to have to do the old mill one based on policy because the new buildings are opening up. And that is the reason why the northern portion of the school district is on the table first. It is also my understanding that there have been historically communities that have been kind of held harmless. And what I have said to our team is the commitment to take a deep look at all of these different communities in a phased process. The amount of stress, and I get what you're saying around, well, this is going to carry on for a couple of years. Yes, it will. But the number of families, and I don't know to what extent how many families will be impacted twice. We know that there will be families impacted twice by this because of the phase-in process. And we have a responsibility to notify and let those parents know that within 2 years, this may happen. But I think to Matt Stansky's point, the amount of stress on this system right now and trying to do whole district redistricting, and we don't have a strategic direction. We just implemented school start times. We still have the teaching implications in terms of human capital gaps that we have to fill, right? Putting this kind of stress on the system all at one time is probably one of the pieces that really concern me the most. But it also gives me time as a new superintendent to be able to implement and to also continue to work with the communities around the fact that we are going to have to look at this whole community as a whole, starting with what we have to do right now, which is the Old Mill cluster, in addition to looking at those schools on the northern entity. I mean, and so I think that was our rationale for wanting to do this in phases. And honestly, it's not, I want to be very clear with everybody in this community, is there's not a lack of courage to do it all at one time, more so than being strategic in how we go about doing it. It needs to be done, and I agree with you on that. I don't think it needs to be done all at one time, given the current state and conditions that we're running this district under.
Well, that was 2 questions. I might have something to follow up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Ellis. Ms. Corkadell.
Thank you, President Tobin, and thank you, Superintendent Bedell and staff. Excellent presentation, and I'm looking forward to moving forward with a project that has a mission, a goal, and everything in writing. No, we have had that in the past, and with Crofton High School, and even many, many years ago. I do have a couple questions, and I understand that you may not necessarily know the answer, and so some of the questions may be better suited to for future. But I thought I would get out there at least some of the things that I would like to see as we move forward and around, and when we can expect to see them would be more my questions. Redistricting costs money. Every time you go to move, your reallocation of transportation, of staff, of other resources, how you can have to sometimes reconfigure existing buildings, those come at a pretty cost. Just to onboard our new Crofton High School, Matt, if my memory serves correctly, we were at $20-some million over a phased-in period for that to occur, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it was more, not just redistricting, but that included opening the new high school.
Correct, but that,
Correct.
yeah, and I remember millions in the single digits in previous iterations back with Mr. Maxwell and some others in the minor redistrictings that we accomplished, particularly in the elementary schools. So I guess I would like to see as we move forward what some of the projected budget implications would be. I think that also probably answers some of the questions as to why a multi-phase is going to be necessary, because I don't think our funders would possibly be willing to reallocate millions of dollars for that all in one year. But so as we move forward, how is the board going to be advised of the budget implications? I know some of it can't be necessarily formalized till the recommendations are occurring, but I think it would be helpful as we're approaching different budget seasons. The seasons are not in sync, they're going to be in sync with the approved, which they should be. That's the correct way. But in order for us to project and plan, do you have an outline or some understanding of how we're going to approach that information?
Yeah, so I think to your point, to give you an accurate number, we will need to know the actual proposals and where the students will be coming from. I mean, so for opening new schools, there are just standard costs across the board that, are pretty standard, and we could get those relatively quickly. But I would imagine in the summertime, we would, once the proposals are presented or the proposal is presented to you, then we would be able to provide you a cost estimate. So
Okay.
I'm imagining in the summer of 2023, but ultimately that would again be an estimate, but we would then ultimately get in the December 23 proposal for fiscal 25 is when you would see our official proposed budget for those two new schools.
Okay, great, thank you. I just think that's helpful because I know it was helpful for me during the last redistricting process to have an understanding of the impact of deviations from some of the proposals that we received and what that would look like from a projection. Hold on one second. So some of my other questions are, and you had mentioned this in part, is related to transportation. And so when I think of transportation with redistricting, the biggest concern, I believe, from parents, second to the what school they're going to attend, is the how long my kid is going to need to be on a bus. One of the biggest reconciliations and accolades that I'm honored to be part of was remedying that for the South River to Crofton. I mean, we literally had kids on Crofton Parkway, and on one half of the parkway, one side of that street, they at 8th grade, they had to say goodbye. And then their other friends had to go on a bus. And that bus route takes you through 3 traffic bubbles. And, we have other traffic bubbles and concerns. And so when we did the start times, in my district at least, I've got kids now on buses for over an hour. I've got high schoolers who are getting up earlier, and they live pretty darn close to the school. So when I look at it, are we going to have a set of criteria, I guess, that we can standardize to ensure equity and fair treatment in the respective districts, recognizing their uniqueness, of course, as we move through the redistricting process? And if you could just share any information you may have preliminarily. I know some of that is still being formulated.
You want to answer that? I don't have a formal answer other than what you presented is common sense in terms of having a criteria and making sure that we apply a lens that doesn't conduct any unnecessary harm, to children and families because of that, the traveling piece. So I don't know what that process is. That's why I have staff here that will speak to that. But that's, to me, would make the most sense to make sure that we do have a criteria that's easily articulated to everybody in the community on how we are making our decisions as it pertains to those types of issues.
Sure. So the redistricting criteria is actually outlined in the regulation. So one of the components, as you mentioned, was the number of students bused and the distance that those students are bused. So that is a component that we would look at during this redistricting process.
Thank you. Yeah, because I know, I think my district's just still a little shy on the whole thing based on what they've just gone through. Not a criticism, just a fact. And I just want to make sure. I mean, Southern is thankfully a little bit further down, and I think that's going to help us better prepare, because my understanding is we still have renovations to make to the changes that we just made this fall, in particular into my district. And so having that stabilized, I think will give us a better understanding and appreciation for what we do need to take as factors and considerations. I have 1 or 2 other questions. We'll see if it ends up being somebody else's, and if not, there's one in particular that I think I'd like to put out there before we conclude, if time permits. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Corkadell. Ms. Schalheim.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I'm grateful for it. Before I get into my questions, I just want to say briefly that to those in the audience and those watching at home and those that will view this presentation, I understand how emotional and how stressful redistricting is. We all lived through Crofton and that scenario, and we also approached Broadneck, although we didn't take action on that. So, and as a parent with a child in the system, I get that this is going to be something that's going to impact each and every one of your children and their schedules and their lives, and I get it. So I just wanted to start there. I do have some questions around which clusters and which groups of students might be touched twice, because I look at the two phases and I get it theoretically, but to, I think it was Miss Ellis's point, the West County would absolutely involve Arundel. Is that correct?
West County
West
Elementary.
County, yeah, elementary school.
West County Elementary School is primarily focusing on the students that attend Piney Orchard right now.
Piney Orchard. Okay, so yes, that is in the current Arundel cluster, and that new school would feed into Arundel High School, correct? At least
Yes.
theoretically, without seeing a specific plan. Okay, so I worry about them being touched twice, but then I also pause and I look at Old Mill, which touches Severna Park, and there's been ongoing issues regarding folks that live in Shipley's Reserve being sold a bag of goods when they bought those houses to go to Severna Park, but yet they're in Old Mill. So I know that there's some potential, there's some issues there, but Old Mill's in the northern cluster in the first round, and then Severna Park's in the second phase, and so I worry about those people being impacted. That's not a question; it's just a statement. But then I also, going back to transportation and what Ms. Corkadell was saying, when I think about District 5 and Broadneck and Severna Park in particular, I really worry about a redistricting that's going to potentially break up communities and put more people on roads that can't take that increased capacity, like Chesapeake. And so I just really hope that when our funders look at what we might do as a school system, that they understand that it cannot just be about students and empty seats, that we also have to understand the real world implications of redistricting and what it's going to mean from a transportation perspective, from a commuting perspective, from an infrastructure perspective, and how we cannot put more kids down Mountain Road, because we inherited a school at the end of a peninsula road, and it just is what it is. And we have to protect those communities too, and their ability to move about and get to and from. And so I guess I don't have a whole lot of questions other than the amount of students that might be particularly impacted twice. So I would love to know more specifics around that when that information is available. I get that we might not have that today. That's really all I have. I'm processing, and I don't want I don't want our funding to be impacted because we're not putting kids in seats. We need to have a lot of education about why we might do this plan or that plan, so that our funders understand that it cannot be about just kids in seats. So that's all I had for now. I will have more questions. It's inevitable later. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Schalheim. Mr. McGrath.
I had similar questions about the families being redistricted twice, but as there isn't data right now, I'll just leave it for later. But thank you for the presentation.
Thank you. Mr. Silkworth.
Thank you, President Tobin. So if I'm going to respond to Dr. Bedell's statement earlier, where he talked about that he didn't think this had been done in 40 years. Well, it hasn't been done in more than 40 years. This is a first, but it must be done. And it will be a challenge. Dr. Bedell's statement, we must do this for the greater good of the county. The greater good of the county must prevail. Certainly did impact me. Of course, I've listened to Ms. Ellis. Annapolis needs relief. And I've said this before, that whatever we decide, resources must be sent during this process to those schools where the needs are, particularly if those schools are not in the beginning phase. I had one question, and that is that, so this looks like north-south. Is there anything that in the process during phase one that would restrict us from making some decisions or some considerations during phase one, which might impact schools in the South? So this is not a restricted process. It's unrestricted.
The way the process works is the superintendent will make a recommendation to you. And then once that recommendation is made, the board can take one option to public hearing, two options, other options. It really then becomes a board process and a board decision as to what they want to do. So what we're presenting really to you today is the timeline for that and what the administration plans to present in that timeline. But once that presentation is made and that recommendation is made by the superintendent, it really becomes a board process. And so there is really no restrictions per policy other than the mandated dates that are outlined in that policy that in which a decision has to be made.
Right, thank you. Well, thank you, Mr. Stansky, Mr. Roof, Mr. Stewart. This presentation has been very, very good, and it has helped a good bit. Just to respond to Ms. Schalheim, I understand your concern, but I think this process is going to open up conversations with some of our political friends to the point that they would understand that, talking about the Mountain Road cluster, that transportation in this county is a concern and has to be addressed.
Thank you, Mr. Silkworth. Dr. Bedell, you said you had a comment?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with the transportation infrastructure concerns. And it is a variable that has to be reckoned with. I think we have to take all of that into account when we think about our ability or inability to be able to get kids in and out of certain areas within the county. That is a reality. And I know that we have some parents in here, I would assume parents, who are probably here feeling the way that I'm feeling right now. So for you all, I am a parent in this county. I'm freaking out just as much as you all are about where will my daughter go as a part of redistricting. And it's a reality. Like, I'm not feeling comfortable about it all, but I think overall, the fact that I know that this has to be done, and I think for me as a parent, what I would want from this administration and from me as a superintendent is just full transparency around context as to why certain lines are being drawn. I think that's going to be the way that we may not be happy about it, but as long as we have context and understanding, I think at the end of the day, we all have to eventually agree to move forward with this. But the anxiety is real. It's here with me right now as a parent, thinking about how would this even impact my daughter at some point who's in the 6th grade. So I just want to put that out there and just assure everybody that, many of us are going to be impacted by this, but I hope that as we go through this process, we can do it with transparency, honesty, and context, and making sure that people have information well in advance to make sure that people understand the why behind it. That's the last piece I have to offer.
Thank you, Dr. Bedell. And I just have a couple of quick comments. Again, thank you very much for the presentation. Obviously, Annapolis High is in my district, and as has been alluded to by several others, is bursting at the seams. So I would hope that if the ultimate recommendation continues to be a two-phase, there's some discussion about, to Mr. Silkworth's point, where what resources will be provided to manage what's going on in the interim. I would also like to remind the public, it's been mentioned that this hasn't been done really in anybody's memory here, even Mr. Silkworth's. Dr. Bedell and this board have inherited something that has been kicked down the road for a very long time. It took us a long time to get into this. It's not going to be simple to get out of it. For those who worry, and rightly so, about fiscal responsibility, I'm sure it is clear to you why we can't have bunches of seats sitting empty unless, to Ms. Schalheim's point and others, there's a very clear rationale for what's going on. And we can't have certain areas remain untouched by these decisions. We have a situation where all you have to do is tour our many different high schools and see the vast differences in space, accommodations, occupancy, and realize that that has profound impact on the equity of the education that our students are receiving. And we as a board would be negligent if we didn't recognize that and begin to address it. And so those are just some comments for sort of historical impact that I want to add to this. However we end up, whatever our recommendations, Dr. Bedell's recommendations, and then our decisions are at the end. None of this is going to be easy or simple. With regard to the issue of potential border impact on certain families, if we were to pursue the plan outlined here, being impacted twice. Obviously, we don't know what, if any, numbers we're looking at and where, but are there any preliminary thoughts about, if that were to be the way we would proceed, how we would communicate that, address that? Any additional thoughts that anybody can provide on that?
I guess for me,
Yeah.
as we go through this process and you start looking at how lines are being drawn, it's going to be very clear what particular communities may be impacted twice. And I think, as I've said to you all earlier, and I think I built my reputation early on about being honest with everybody about the realities of what we're dealing with so that nobody is blindsided. We haven't blindsided anybody since I've started in this district with anything that may introduce controversy. We'll do the same. We will say to families at this point, here's how the lines are being drawn. Your family may be impacted. May not be that it's a reality, but you may be impacted based on how these lines are drawn and when we have to go into this process again for the other part of the county. And I think we'll know a lot more about that as we get into this work of doing the northern part of the county in order to be able to forewarn parents that based on how these lines are shaping out, your family will be potentially impacted when we do this again in 2 years.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bedell. So I will simply go around and ask each member one more time, and if you have additional questions, please feel free to take the opportunity. So Ms. Frank.
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay, so I did have I'm listening to the debate between one fell swoop, a couple of chunks. So I have some questions to that. You provided a slide that showed the growth enrollment projections for the northern versus the southern parts of the county. And they're pretty vague. They're sort of, generalized. This is how many students we expect. Do you have more granular data as far as we suspect this particular cluster will grow by X percent? And are you able to kind of look at the counties, where development is occurring and give a much more detailed projection? And do you sometimes get surprised with growth projects? At the last minute, we thought we would get, 5,000 extra kids, but then they ended up being, an over 55 community, and we were spared that. And how stable are these projections?
So up on the screen is the maps for 2031. So these are projected enrollments for that.
I can't see that one. Can you zoom that in?
I cannot.
Okay.
But we will have this posted. But the resource for all that information is this book right here. So this is the master plan. This is posted on the internet. All the data for every single school based on grade level, feeder system, enrollment patterns is all published here. And to answer your question about surprises, we update this every year. So every June, the Board of Education sees this volume. And as Mr. Stansky mentioned, we're going to be using the 23 to update prior or after the recommendation so that Dr. Bedell has the most up-to-date information before he brings it to the board.
Okay, so what I'm asking is, if you have a projection for now up until 2027, 2028, do you suspect that will change drastically? And has it traditionally changed drastically? Or is it usually pretty even keel and you just kind of tweak it a little bit as needed?
I guess you have to look at it from a variety of lenses, right? As you get further and further out, the cone of discrepancy gets larger with any projection that you have. No one could have predicted 2020 enrollments, right? We did not realize a pandemic was coming. We didn't realize that enrollments would drop that year. So are there swings? Yes. Do we try to predict those as much as we can? And that's why we redo this every single year so that we can reevaluate each school system or each school, the feeder patterns, development that happens in the county, projected housing developments, what that's going to generate as far as student generation factors. And that all gets published in this volume.
If I may ask this question. So let's take the outlier year out of the conversation with COVID. And so if we were to look at our trend data around our estimates of projected enrollment, I would say over the last 5 years prior to COVID, what percent of accuracy were we, generally 97, 98% accurate? Has that been a trend on what we projected and what actually showed up in actual numbers? So I think that's what she's asking. So how static will this be as we have our outlooks when we've looked at these projections over time? So I'm only going off of my experience of projections 6 years in Kansas City. We generally came in probably somewhere around 90, 96, 97% of what was projected.
Well, a couple things. We look at current year projections to see how close we were. And surprisingly, we were under 1%. At 1 year, we were off by like 64 students out of 84,000. So I thought that was pretty good for Mr. Schuler. So shout out to Mr. Schuler who does our projections. Certainly, he readjusts every year. We look at it. We talk to developers. We find out build rates. Right now the interest rates have doubled. That slows down how fast homes are being sold, especially new developments. So certainly we take that into consideration. Looking at historical, when you go back so many years in the master plan, we've actually undershot long-range projections by a fair number. Keep in mind, I only know who was born yesterday. 5 years from now, again, we have kindergartners. We don't know who's born tomorrow. So all the projections, we have state data, basically birth rates. So you'll see most of the projection tables that we have, once you get out about 5 years, they start to level off. And the only adjustments we can really make are if we have large developments that we know there's, these either rezonings or large PUDs, planned developments, and we can see that large development and we can add that into the projections. So it's somewhat of a science, somewhat art with it. So.
Yes, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. So thank you for the clarifying question, Dr. Bell. I do have a few comments myself. If do you want to take comments now or in the next round?
I think some of us have made comments. You should be able to make a comment.
My comment is toward the Chesapeake feeder system. Obviously, that came up in conversation, so I do want to address that as well. It is a peninsula. There's really not a whole lot of allocation that could happen countywide unless you bulldoze a community. And I certainly would have, being in probably the line of travel for that, would have some concerns about that. Although, I do want a new house, so who knows? So we also have to there is a lot to consider, and I wasn't thinking that we would start this conversation, but it's been brought up, so I represent that district. I absolutely want to say a couple of things. The only potential allocation that you could provide to this community without sort of bulldozing through, multiple communities parallel to Mountain Road, which I don't think would service us. You'd be getting rid of the kids that you're trying to bring in, would be to build a bridge, which would be all the way down Fort Smallwood Road, which is in itself a peninsula. So even if you spent an extraordinary amount of money building a bridge all the way down that creek, you would still have a similar problem because you have Fort Smallwood Elementary all the way down there, and you have limited access as the peninsula on that side narrows. So there are, I've looked at some of the older plans. This was supposed to have had another road, and I've actually seen it where it would have backed up to Chesapeake. But that didn't happen. And as Dr. Tobin mentioned, we sort of inherited the school problem when we've also inherited sort of the building problem in our community. So as we discuss what metrics we're going to use to create a plan, I'm certainly going to be bringing that up over and over and over, because that is something that I would say you have to be very careful about creating additional problems and expecting additional funding that is not going to help you. So I will certainly put that out on the table as well, and try to just mention that there's really no solution there that I could see. If somebody wants to bring one, I would be happy to look at it, but I don't see one that doesn't involve bulldozing some communities. And then the other piece of this is, if we are discussing Chesapeake, which I'm certainly interested in figuring that out as well. If we have an implementation plan that stops at the Chesapeake district and does not include the Severna Park district, as Chesapeake is the lowest capacity school, I think it would make sense to kind of pull the Severna Park cluster into that, because we have people in Severna Park who are already driving all the way down Mountain Road into Chesapeake. So I was surprised at that piece not being dovetailed. So I would just maybe want to have a conversation as to why. And I guess you have to draw the line somewhere, and that's where the line was drawn. But it would seem to make sense to me to keep those together, because we already have quite a bit of overlay. So just a thought there.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Ellis.
Thank you. And I didn't want to interrupt, but while it is hard to read the screen, the pink areas are the areas that are projected to not have additional capacity in 2031. So visually, you can sort of get a sense for that. And as far as accuracy of the projections, they have been, credit to everyone who is involved in that work. Pretty accurate most of the time, but when there is a rezoning like Two Rivers, that definitely, this board was told, this is why we're in this position right now, because there was a sudden explosion that no one anticipated. So that does happen. Okay, so a couple things. The cost of redistricting was brought up what are the costs besides, obviously there's work that goes into the planning office providing data, right? As
Mhm.
plans are developed, and then bus routing. But we're not talking, not the cost of opening a school,
Right.
but cost of moving families. What would cause budgetary implications beyond those two?
So I've seen in other districts where if there's a major rezoning or redistricting, the schools receiving a large amount of students will receive extra budgetary support to help those students acclimate into their new school environment. So there is a possibility if there's a proposal to move a significant number of students from one school into a new school, that that receiving school get additional resources to help welcome the new students into that community and that culture, right? Each school's got their own sort of unique cultures, and so those transition costs at times, but we wouldn't know that. You wouldn't know that until we knew proposals, and that Dr. Bedell and the team would want to make a recommendation that would possibly give additional resources to those schools above and beyond what they would normally get with an increased enrollment because of the sensitivity of the transition.
Okay, so that would be like a temporary, you're not talking about,
Possibly maybe a multi-year, could be.
you're not talking about the additional staffing
Right,
to meet
right.
enrollment.
Right.
Okay.
And if there are any additional facility modifications, that would have to happen at the receiving school as well.
Right. Okay, and one thing I did jot down when Dr. Bedell made his remarks about the greater good of the county. I definitely believe, there's merits to going one direction or the other, and I definitely believe that we all have the greater good of the county at our heart as we decide how to proceed. But one thing I want to clarify is the process now that we're involved in. It was, we're presented with a plan for how to proceed. I see this as a recommended plan. I heard some remarks that have me a little concerned. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. At this point, the board needs to decide how to proceed here, because if we were just to proceed with the plan presented with us two-phase, and then the board would prefer to see a district-wide solution, we can't wait until the end of this phase to just suddenly throw in new boundaries and say, we want to see this happen, right? We wouldn't give the community a fair opportunity to weigh in that way. So currently we're having a workshop and we're presented a plan. That's the recommendation of the superintendent and staff. But should the board wish to proceed with a district-wide solution, the board would need to decide that at this end of the process, correct?
Mr. Stansky, do you want to?
Our read of the policy, we've developed a timeline based on our read of the policy. I think that answer probably should come from board counsel as to if the board wishes to go a different direction than what is presented. I don't see how that works in policy as it's currently written, but that's why I'm not a lawyer.
And thank you for an honest answer. I agree with your answer, and we don't have board counsel here today, and the board's not taking any action today. But I just want to make sure we were all on the same page on how we're proceeding here. I'm again, I've already got mail in my inbox with concerns about a two-phase plan. This board member is not thoroughly convinced that this is again, with the greater good of the community in mind, I'm concerned about creating stability and being able to get this behind us and move forward as a district. So yeah, there's just more. I will certainly consult with board counsel, and the conversation's not over, but thank you for the presentation and the opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. Ms. Corkadell.
I'm going to be a little more nuts and bolts over here and go a little more traditional workshop route. Just a couple follow-up questions. We're going to have to accommodate pre-K. That would obviously be occurring in the elementary schools because we don't have too many Weems Creeks and Lucy leftover facilities. And then we have our existing magnets, and Blueprint is going to be transforming not just our CTEs, but possibly our magnets and our approach to that from an opportunity gap lens as well, I believe, and otherwise. And so that's going to be happening kind of at the same time. And so I think what I heard in the Blueprint workshop is that through the course of identifying, and particularly those who are not going to be eligible, I think Anne Arundel County pretty got a short stick of funding as it relates to community schools. The definitions were not necessarily kind to us of reality versus criteria. So we're going to have to do our own investment. And so I'm wondering how in the structure of the program, we're going to be working that in. And what does that look like? I mean, obviously, we're in the preliminary of the actual program itself, but I think these are two aspects that are a high priority in general for us. So I would be curious to see, as this gets finalized, what that would look like, and if you had any comments to that effect, because what we may want to do in redistricting of a particular elementary school may be impacted by a decision that we make regarding preschool, likewise with our high schools. South River, I believe, was held back. Those couple hundred positions were to allow for more opportunity for so many students who have a barrier because of the limit. And then, of course, COVID hit, transportation hit, obviously, but we're going to have to rethink it. So I would be open to hearing any thoughts as to how we're going to do that, and then when as things are filling in, what that timeline looks like in regards to updates.
Yeah, so great question. I think Mr. Stewart alluded to it earlier about projecting kindergarten. It's even more difficult to project pre-K because there's one, it's not compulsory, so it's by choice, and two, there's income requirements and things of that nature. And we just do not have good data yet. But pre-K, along with other programs, will definitely be in consideration as we review proposals. It just has to be. And I think as we do that, and we get more clarity around the requirements around pre-K, or whether it be magnets or even special education programs, all of those program placements have to be considered as we, run the data and look at the numbers. And so I can't speak to more specific as to what we're going to do, but to tell you that program placement and projected enrollments for those programs to include pre-K will be a variable. But I will say that the Blueprint did contemplate what we would say non-traditional locations for pre-K, right? It did contemplate high school, contemplated middle school, contemplated senior centers, libraries, all kinds of places, knowing that the capacity for districts at the moment to implement the program to meet the need just wasn't there. And so we're going to have to do our best, given the limited data we have, to include these possible pre-K seats in our deliberations as we run the numbers and make proposals.
Well, based on how we had the workshop on the Blueprint and then now this, I would just suggest that we consider continuing that path and getting the updates so that they are running not at the same time, but one is helping inform the other, because having that workshop was definitely helpful to build in, to ask the right questions, number one, and then look for when the answers should be happening. So thank you. I may have a couple more questions as we move closer into it, but I don't have any more at this time, and I'll hold any commentary because it's a workshop.
Yeah, Ms. Corkadale, I will say probably one of the biggest benefits of Mr. Stansky helping to lead this at this point with his financial background, but also the fact that everything blueprint kind of comes under you anyhow. So both of those work. That all will work in concert with each other. So
Yep.
I just want to give you that piece.
Yeah, and and I think assuring the community, because we're talking about these big giant things, to know that that we're not in silos, and we're not even in silos with bridges. That we are that it's actually consorted. I think will go a long way for us establishing trust to an otherwise contentious process by its very definition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Corkadell. Ms. Schulheim.
Yeah, I share Ms. Frank's concern about addressing some of these clusters in a vacuum, because I'm struggling with that too. I don't see how you do Old Mill without touching part of Severna Park. I don't see how you do Chesapeake without touching part of Severna Park. Broadneck's kind of its own animal because I don't see it. But Broadneck would impact Severna Park too, but it's on a peninsula, so it's kind of different. So I struggle with that. So with this, do you see, as it's been laid out here, and as you've thought about it, Chesapeake, Glen Burnie, Meade, North County, Old Mill, and Northeast being in a vacuum, completely separate from that line where that north-south border line? Is that what you're envisioning, or is it possible in doing Old Mill that it does impact Severna Park? So then Severna Park is in both the first phase and the second phase, and same with Chesapeake and Severna Park. Does that make sense? Am I making sense?
The plans as we have them envisioned right now will only touch the clusters that are mentioned on the slides. All right.
Okay.
Is it possible that once the second phase is developed, that there could be possible discrepancies between where the border is? That's possible. Is it our goal? No.
Okay. So then Chesapeake would be its own animal in the first phase, and Severna Park would be its own animal in the second phase, according to this.
It's possible that there could be areas that are touched twice.
But there could be areas touched twice. Okay. I'm a visual learner. I'm just trying to get my head around it. I look at this map and I'm like, dear Lord, I can't read it. So like, I look forward to really studying it when we are able to zoom in.
Yeah, how soon can we get a legible map up? I was thank you. I was texting the team because we do dry runs, and I will be the first to tell you we absolutely missed this. I mean, I wouldn't want something up that nobody can see, but we'll get an updated one to you all. So,
and that's no shade thrown, because like you all, this is a good presentation. I have a lot to chew on. Yeah, and this is good because this helps us get the information and then digest, and then I'm sure we'll have a lot more questions later. But that is the piece that sort of bothers me. I mean, in one sense I'm glad for it, but then on the other part, I just don't know how it could realistically occur. But I'll let you all come up with a plan. I can't wait to see it in the future. Thank you.
Your mic.
We do have this slide electronically, and it is a little easier. I'm just letting you know.
I don't
Yeah.
look at it. I just
Yeah.
compare it to my computer.
No. No, I get it. I'm just saying for going back later, we can all look at it. It's a little fuzzy, but you can.
We'll get you
there's
more
also
of
the
that.
We'll
issue of
be
the
able
public
to
watching
provide.
this too, that we want something.
Absolutely.
So again,
This should be posted.
much appreciated for the work. This is just one bit. Thank you, Ms. Schalheim. Mr. McGrath.
I thought the community input was a bit interesting. Would that just be shown out through the regular channels, like people would give their input, and then it would, like, how much consideration would that be given, or would that be too much of like a specific thing? We'll like figure that out later.
No, I think the web tool will be available for a few months, and obviously would be, if Dr. Bedell has shown you anything, is that he takes public input very seriously, and would certainly be a big variable in our decision as to what proposal we would recommend to the board.
Yeah, part of the web tool, there will be a survey that people can basically provide comments on lots of different aspects of the whole plan.
There's also a dedicated email that folks could send their messages through.
I'm going to come back to you. Are you done, Ms. Schalheim? Or are you? Oh, okay.
When we think back to those of us who were here when Crofton went down, there was a lot of public input even in that process, and it was very emotional from all sides of that. And but I do feel in the end that whether or not the public liked the ultimate decision, I do feel like they were given a lot of opportunity to be heard. I mean, several of us who were on at that time, were invited by various groups that we went to go visit in ones and twos, not to break OMA, to hear out folks. So it was, and this seems even more robust. So I think that the public will be provided masses of opportunity to provide and I hope that they do.
And if I may, and this is to the team, my assumption would be, while everybody won't get everything that they want, there were things that were considered based on some of that feedback that actually changed the course of some of the decisions. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Silkworth.
I don't have any questions at this time. I do have some comments, which if you want me to wait until another round.
I think we're okay. So go ahead.
Okay, so I guess a basic question is why redistricting? And we're doing this to eliminate overcrowding, which leads to inequity. We have to redistrict the Old Mill cluster into reasonable and equitable attendance boundaries to promote and create equitable learning environments. We have to make the best and most efficient use of the seats that we have available. We must provide resources during the process to negatively impacted clusters. We need to provide adequate info to all of our stakeholders who are nervously awaiting this process. We need to make sure that we provide as much transparency as possible, and we must provide as much as possible opportunities for input, which I think has all been discussed. And we need to educate our stakeholders about the importance of redistricting in a comprehensive manner, the absolute importance of that. And again, I said earlier that I did like Dr. Bedell's statement, the greater good of the county must prevail. But it says, as I have been thinking and listening to everyone, I'm going to change that to the following. The greater good of the county must prevail, but more importantly, the greater good of all of our students and communities must prevail. So I would like to say Happy New Year to all of the students, parents, teachers, and staff that have been watching. And once again, thank you so much to Mr. Stansky, Mr. Root, Mr. Stewart, Dr. Bedell, your staff for this presentation. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Just one quick thing that I had, maybe might be worth elaborating slightly. Dr. Bedell and Mr. Stansky, both in your responses, I believe, to Ms. Ellis's question initially, you both made the point that you have real concerns about doing a one-phase redistricting and frankly, the bandwidth of the district to handle this. I believe, Dr. Bedell, you mentioned something you've talked with us extensively about, both, in many contexts, which is that one of your primary focuses right now is developing a strategic plan, for example. And if I'm following the logic correctly, my understanding is your concern is not only the work that goes into developing a robust strategic plan that the community is a part of, right? But then making decisions like redistricting in concert with the strategies that are in the strategic plan, right? The goals, the mission, everything. Would you like to say a few more words about that, or members
sure.
of staff?
I absolutely would. I mean, as we've been going out and engaging the community with our listening and learning tours, we've talked about this process of a new superintendent coming in and executing a 100-day plan, right? So I haven't even posted a post-entry plan around what has been learned and discovered in this county. So for people to have some understanding of what our true realities are as a county, other than me saying verbally, we're a good county. There's a lot of room for us to grow to become great, right? And I've talked about all of the initiatives that we've already undertaken in this county while still trying to recover from COVID. There are a lot of concerns that I have just around stretch, bandwidth, and stress on the system. That's the reason why I've been concerned about trying to do a whole district process. We said we would get this 100-day plan executed and then get our post-entry plan published and then start building out our strategic plan. Now, as we know by policy, we don't have a choice. We have to jump on this redistricting conversation because of the old mill new schools that are opening up in West County. But at least what it will also do is give us time to get a strategic plan that's in alignment with the Maryland blueprint for the future, a strategic plan that is easy for our parents to understand what direction are we heading in from a social, emotional, and academic performance. So being able to have a strategic plan that includes metrics that we can provide to you all every year on an annual basis how our school district is progressing. A strategic plan built with the lens of equity in there, because we talk about equity and we try to say to everybody, equity shouldn't just be minimized, that it's only about socioeconomic status or it's only the focus on Black and brown children. Equity is about also how do we serve this system as a whole. And there are areas where we have created inequities that we want our strategic plan to ensure that it's easy for people to see how we're going to be addressing that through our framework. And then the last part that I think is very critical, and it really aligns more with blueprint than anything else, how are we going to innovate? So what's the plan to innovate and to start to do things in a non-traditional way while still embracing some of the traditional factors? All of those things require also engagement of the community to put this strategic plan together that will take us through what we need to do over the next 5 years. And so it's a process. And the thing I always tell people, this says, once you become fearless, life becomes limitless, right? And I've said this early on. It's not a lack of courage that we want to do this in 2 phases, more so than not trying to be reckless in how we go about doing what we're doing, as far as putting the system in a position where it is just too much stress, and now we're not getting anything done because we're having an exodus of everybody because we're doing way too much at one time. And so it's a process. And the thing that I've said to people all along, Like, I worked in one of the most difficult school districts in the United States. I didn't last there 6 years, just coming in and just tearing things up. And, you know, and I'm not saying that that's what we're doing, but that's what I feel like I'm being put in a position on when you're telling me we should do this all at one time, when we got a bunch of different steps that have not been addressed yet that need to be addressed. And then that's how you get longer tenure with your superintendent, is coming in and being strategic and making sure that the things that we said we were going to do, we deliver on those, so that there's some level of confidence from the community that, okay, I can trust where they're trying to go. I may not like what they're doing, I may not agree with it, but I can trust because they've demonstrated that they said they were going to do what they're going to do, and they did what they said they were going to do.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bedell. So I'll do one more quick round. I know there were a couple of members who had additional comments, so I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity. So Ms. Frank?
Just thank you. This was a very interesting discussion, perspective. It's a lot to chew on, and I appreciate all the work that you put into it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Ellis?
Thank you. I may have requests for some additional data coming up, but that, I'll reach out to you. And thank you very much for the presentation. And look, once more, we all have the good of the entire district at heart. And I hope we can come together on this. Once again, I see there's upsides and downsides to both doing it both ways. And for me right now, the downsides to a two-phase plan still have me greatly concerned. But I do understand the concerns with doing it that way.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. Ms. Corkadell?
So thank you once again. And my only comment, Dr. Bedell, is can you give us assurance that the Bills are going to beat the Patriots? No.
You mean
That's
beat
my only
Cincinnati?
comment.
Cincinnati?
No, they need to beat Cincinnati, please.
Yeah.
That was a good one. Okay.
The Bills need to win. Say it.
And if you can give that assurance, you should be in another profession. But anyway. Ms. Schulheim?
Yeah, that right over my head. Not really a sports fan. Sorry. Except for our athletes, our student athletes. All right. Yeah, just thank you for your time and for this information. Like Ms. Frank said, this is an awful lot to chew on. Grateful for the revised timeline. There was something about the other timeline that really, this gives us more time to really chew on things. It gives us more time to engage our constituents. It gives us more time to hear everyone's concerns. I like this. I like, theoretically, I mean, with regard to the timeline, I really like what I'm seeing, what you all presented today. And so just, like I said, I'm a visual learner, and this is, it's just a lot to process and digest. I will inevitably have more questions, but I'm really grateful for this conversation today. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. McGrath?
Yep, thank you. I feel like we're in good hands.
Yeah, you'll be in college.
If you show up with popcorn and sit in the back, you're done.
I wouldn't dream of it.
Mr. Silkworth?
Thank you, President Tobin. I also am very appreciative for the conversation this evening, and very appreciative of Dr. Bedell and you three gentlemen and whatever other staff that has helped with this. And so it's a new year in January. It's going to be a busy January. The Gophers will be going to take on the Knights tomorrow night at North County High School. And that's always an exciting, that's the Battle of B&A Boulevard. And by the way, if the Bills beat Cincinnati, that is going to help the Ravens as well. Although the Ravens could have helped themselves yesterday.
From Pittsburgh.
We will be migrating to ESPN if this doesn't work out. So I will add my thanks. I know there's a huge amount of work that went into this, and it is greatly appreciated. I also want to say that I appreciate everybody coming back and doing this on the first day after New Year. I know some of this was to accommodate the board, and I'm very grateful to you. My hope is, because it is a day that some parents don't have to be at work while their kids are at school, that more folks were able to tune in. I also want to apologize to some of the members or some of the parents who are having trouble getting in. We're a little low on staff right now with some folks who are out ill, so our apologies for that. There was a little scrambling at the last minute, so but we're grateful that you are here. And I think that about covers it. So I hope everybody enjoys the rest of the day. For those out there, I hope everything goes well as we start the new year. And thank you all again to the staff, and have a great day, everyone.